Commander Zektar stood on the bridge of his massive warship, looking out at the stars through the viewing window. His blue skin showed the scars of many battles, and his forearms moved with practiced ease as he reviewed the datapad in his hands. After 30 years of military service in the Valonian Empire, he thought he had seen every type of warrior in the galaxy. Today would prove him wrong. The message from High Command was simple enough. A new species called humans had recently joined the Galactic Defense Alliance. They needed to be tested in real combat to see if they were worth keeping around. The Korthak raiders were attacking mining stations again, so this seemed like a perfect chance to see what these humans could do. Zektar had read the reports about Earth and its people. They were a young species that had only discovered faster-than-light travel 50 years ago. Their technology was basic, their ships were small, and their weapons were outdated by galactic standards. Most other commanders saw this assignment as babysitting duty, but Zektar took his responsibilities seriously. His communication officer, a tall Valonian with silver markings, approached him. "Commander, the human ship has arrived. They are requesting permission to dock." Zektar nodded and walked to the main display screen. What he saw made him pause. The human ship looked nothing like the sleek, elegant vessels of the Valonian fleet. It was blocky, covered in what appeared to be patches and repairs, and had strange markings painted on its hull. The ship looked more like a flying junkyard than a military vessel. "Tell them they can dock at Bay 7, Zektar said. "I want to meet their commander before we begin the mission." 20 minutes later, Zektar stood in the docking bay as the human shuttle landed. The door opened with a hiss and 3 humans stepped out. The first was a man with short brown hair and a confident walk. He wore a blue uniform that looked simple compared to the ornate dress of Valonian officers. Behind him came a woman with dark hair pulled back in a tight style and a third human, a man with broader shoulders and watchful eyes. The first human approached Zektar and held out his hand. "Commander Zektar, I'm Captain Jake Morrison of the UES Defiant. This is Lieutenant Colonel Amy Rodriguez, our Ground Forces Commander, and Staff Sergeant Tony Ricci, Special Operations." Zektar looked at the extended hand for a moment before realizing it was some kind of greeting ritual. He awkwardly shook the human's hand with one of his forearms. The human's grip was firm but not aggressive. "Captain Morrison," Zektar said in his deep voice, "I have read your service record. You have been in several conflicts with other human nations before joining the galactic community." Morrison nodded. "That's right, sir. We've had our share of fights back home. Learned a few things along the way." Zektar found this puzzling. Most civilized species had ended internal warfare long before achieving space travel. The fact that humans were still fighting each other seemed to prove they were not ready for galactic military service. "Your ship," Zektar said, gesturing toward the viewing port where the human vessel was visible. "It appears to have seen better days." Morrison grinned, which Zektar had learned was a human expression of amusement. "The Defiant's been through a lot, but she's tougher than she looks. We've learned to keep her running with whatever we can find." "I see," Zektar said, though he did not really understand. Proper military vessels were maintained with regulation parts and procedures. The idea of using random materials for repairs seemed unprofessional. Rodriguez stepped forward. "Commander, what can you tell us about the mission? We know we're dealing with Korthak raiders, but we'd like more details about the enemy force and our objectives." Zektar appreciated her direct approach. "The Korthak are attacking mining station Delta 7. Intelligence suggests they have 6 heavy cruisers and approximately 200 ground troops. Our fleet will engage their ships while ground forces secure the station and protect the civilians." "What's our role in this?" Ricci asked. His voice was quiet but alert. "Your ship will defend Supply Depot Beta 3, approximately 10 kilometers from the main station. It is not a critical target, but it contains valuable equipment. Consider it a training exercise." The 3 humans exchanged a look that Zektar could not interpret. Morrison nodded slowly. "Understood, Commander. We'll make sure that Depot stays in Alliance hands." After the humans returned to their ship, Zektar called a meeting with his senior officers. Captain Velton, His second-in-command was already expressing doubts about the mission. "Commander, are we certain about using these humans in combat? Their ship barely qualifies as a military vessel, and their tactics appear to be completely unconventional." Zektar had to agree. During his review of human military history, he had found countless examples of behavior that violated every principle of civilized warfare. They used ambush tactics, fought without proper formations, and seemed to believe that any method of winning was acceptable. "High Command wants them tested," Zektar replied. "The depot assignment will keep them out of the main battle while giving us a chance to observe their capabilities." "What if they retreat when they see the size of the Korthak force?" asked Commander Sildar, the head of ground operations. Zektar considered this. The Korthak were known for their brutal efficiency and overwhelming numbers. Most species would request evacuation when faced with such odds. "If they run, at least we will know they are not suitable for future operations." The fleet moved into position over the next few hours. Zektar watched from his command center as the various ships took their assigned positions. The human ship moved differently from the others, making small course corrections and speed changes that seemed random. Proper military vessels maintained steady formations and predictable movements. "Commander," his communications officer called out, "we are receiving a message from the human ship. Put it through." Captain Morrison's voice came through the speakers with background noise that suggested their communication system needed repair. "Commander Zektar, this is Captain Morrison. My crew has been looking at the sensor data for the depot we're supposed to defend. We've got some ideas about how to improve the defensive position." "What kind of ideas?" Zektar asked, curious despite himself. "Well, sir, the depot has a lot of industrial equipment that could be useful. Mining charges, heavy machinery, power systems that could be modified. We'd like permission to make some adjustments before the Korthak arrive." Zektar frowned. Military doctrine called for defending positions as they were found, not making unauthorized modifications. "Captain, the depot is a civilian facility. You are not authorized to make changes to its structure." There was a pause before Morrison replied. "Understood, Commander. We'll work with what we have." The communication ended, but Zektar had the feeling that the humans would do whatever they thought was necessary, regardless of his orders. This concerned him, but there was no time to worry about it now. Long-range sensors were detecting the approaching Korthak fleet. "All ships prepare for battle," Zektar announced across the fleet communications. "The enemy will arrive in approximately 30 minutes. As the Valonian ships moved into their precise battle formations, Zektar noticed that the human ship was still making erratic movements near the depot. He opened a private channel to Captain Morrison. "Captain, you need to move your ship into proper defensive position around the depot." "Roger that, Commander. We're just finishing up some last-minute preparations. Don't worry about us, we'll be ready when they get here." Zektar ended the communication with growing frustration. These humans seemed incapable of following basic military procedures. He made a mental note to recommend that humanity receive additional training before being allowed to participate in future operations. The Korthak fleet appeared on sensors, moving in their typical assault formation. 6 heavy cruisers accompanied by dozens of smaller ships, all heading directly for the mining station. It was exactly the kind of overwhelming force that had made the Korthak feared throughout this sector of space. Zektar opened fleet communications one final time before the battle began. "All ships engage the enemy according to plan. Remember, we fight with honor and discipline. Show these raiders what civilized warfare looks like." As he spoke these words, Zektar had no idea that within the next few hours his entire understanding of warfare would be turned upside down by a group of humans who had never heard of fighting with honor. The Korthak fleet dropped out of hyperspace like a pack of hungry wolves. Their dark ships moved in perfect formation, weapons already charging for the attack. Zektar watched from his command bridge as the enemy vessels spread out to surround the mining station. 6 heavy cruisers, just as intelligence predicted, reported his tactical officer. "They are moving to attack positions." Zektar nodded and opened communications to his fleet. "All ships execute Battle Plan Alpha. Maintain formation and engage the enemy with disciplined fire. The Valonian warships moved into their assigned positions with mechanical precision. Each captain knew exactly where to be and what to do. This was how civilized species fought wars, with order and planning. But when Zektar looked at his tactical display, he noticed something strange. The human ship was not where it was supposed to be. Communications, contact the human vessel. They are out of position. Yes, Commander. Captain Morrison, you need to return to your assigned coordinates immediately. Morrison's voice crackled through the speakers. Sorry about that, Commander. We're making some adjustments to our approach. Don't worry, we've got this covered. Before Zektar could respond, the human ship suddenly accelerated and began moving in a pattern that made no sense. Instead of staying near the depot in a defensive position, it was zigzagging through space like it was trying to avoid something. What are they doing? Asked Captain Velton, Zektar's second-in-command. I have no idea, Zektar replied, watching in confusion as the human ship continued its erratic movements. The battle began when the Korthak cruisers opened fire on the mining station. Bright energy beams lanced through space, striking the station's shields. The Valonian fleet responded with coordinated volleys, their weapons firing in perfect timing. But the humans were doing something completely different. Instead of using their main guns to fight the Korthak ships that were heading toward the depot, the human vessel suddenly accelerated toward a group of asteroids floating nearby. Zektar watched in amazement as Captain Morrison's ship began pushing the space rocks toward the enemy vessels. Are they using asteroids as weapons? Velton asked in disbelief. Before Zektar could answer, the human ship did something even more shocking. It fired what appeared to be mining charges at the asteroids, breaking them into smaller chunks that scattered toward the Korthak ships like a deadly cloud. This is not proper military procedure, Zektar muttered, but he had to admit, it was effective. The Korthak pilots were forced to dodge the debris, breaking their formation. On his communication system, Zektar could hear the humans talking to each other. Their voices were calm, almost casual, as they coordinated their strange attack. Pete, can you reroute power from the life support to the engines? We need more speed for this next part. Already on it, Captain, but if we keep this up, we're going to burn out half our systems. Better than being dead. Tony, how are things down at the depot? Zektar switched his view to the cameras monitoring the supply depot. What he saw there was even more confusing than the space battle. The depot was supposed to be defended by staying inside and using the building's walls for protection. But the humans had abandoned this strategy completely. Instead of waiting for the Korthak ground troops to attack, they had spread out through the entire facility and were doing things that no military manual had ever described. Lieutenant Colonel Rodriguez was not in the command center where she should have been. Instead, she was crawling through air vents with several of her soldiers, moving through the building like they were hunting animals instead of defending a position. What is she doing? Zektar asked aloud. His tactical officer enhanced the camera view. It appears they are setting up some kind of traps throughout the facility. Zektar watched as Sergeant Lisa Park, one of Rodriguez's soldiers, used cleaning chemicals from a supply closet to create what looked like explosives. Another soldier was rigging the ventilation system to fill certain areas with steam from the heating pipes. This is completely against regulations, Velton said. They are supposed to defend the depot, not destroy it. But as Zektar continued watching, he began to understand what the humans were doing. They were not just defending the depot. They were turning the entire building into a weapon. Staff Sergeant Ricci appeared on another camera, leading his special operations team through the facility's maintenance areas. They were not carrying standard weapons. Instead, they had collected tools from around the depot: welding torches, heavy wrenches, industrial cutting equipment, even kitchen knives from the worker cafeteria. They are using maintenance tools as weapons, Zektar observed. Should we order them to stop? Asked his communications officer. Zektar paused. The humans were breaking every rule of civilized warfare, but they were also preparing for the enemy in ways he had never seen before. No, let us see what happens. The first Korthak dropships landed near the depot 10 minutes later. The Korthak were known throughout the galaxy as fierce warriors. They were larger than humans, stronger, and better armed. Their standard attack strategy was simple: overwhelm the enemy with superior numbers and firepower. 50 Korthak soldiers marched toward the depot in perfect formation, expecting to find human defenders hiding behind walls and barricades. Instead, they found empty corridors and silence. Zektar watched through the security cameras as the Korthak troops entered the building. They moved carefully but confidently, their heavy boots echoing in the empty hallways. Then the humans struck. The first trap was simple but effective. As the Korthak moved through a corridor, Corporal Dan Wright opened a valve that sent superheated steam pouring from the ceiling vents. The alien warriors, caught by surprise, stumbled backward in confusion. While they were distracted, Rodriguez and her team attacked from above, dropping down from the air vents like predators. They did not fight the way the Korthak expected. Instead of standing and trading shots, they hit quickly and then disappeared back into the building's hidden spaces. They are using guerrilla tactics, Zektar realized. What are guerrilla tactics? Velton asked. Zektar had studied human military history as part of his preparation for this mission. It is a form of warfare where smaller forces use hit-and-run attacks against larger enemies. It is considered uncivilized by galactic standards. But as he watched the battle unfold, Zektar had to admit that the uncivilized tactics were working. The Korthak soldiers, trained for direct combat, did not know how to fight an enemy that refused to stand still and fight properly. Private Nancy Bell had turned the depot's power systems into weapons. When a group of Korthak tried to enter the main storage area, she overloaded the electrical grid, creating sparks and power surges that forced them to retreat. Meanwhile, in space, Captain Morrison's ship was still doing impossible things. The human vessel was now using the depot's own crane systems as weapons, grabbing pieces of space debris and flinging them at the Korthak ships like a giant slingshot. "How is their ship still functioning?" Velton asked. "They have been pushing their engines beyond safe limits for 20 minutes. Zektar could hear the humans talking on their communication channel. Engineer Pete Collins was somehow keeping their ship running with repairs that should not have been possible. "Captain, I've got the main gun back online, but it's jury-rigged. With spare parts from the coffee machine, it might explode when we fire it. Will it work? Maybe. Probably. I honestly have no idea." "Good enough. Fire when ready." Zektar could not believe what he was hearing. These humans were using parts from a coffee machine to repair military weapons, and they seemed to think this was normal. The human ship fired its improvised weapon at a Korthak cruiser. The beam was unstable and flickered, but it struck the enemy vessel's shield generator and knocked it offline. Back at the depot, Staff Sergeant Ricci's team had done something that shocked even Zektar. Instead of defending the building, they had left it entirely and were now attacking the Korthak dropships from outside. Using nothing but maintenance tools and pure determination, the human soldiers were systematically disabling the enemy landing craft. Ricci himself was cutting through the hull of one ship with a welding torch while his team members threw improvised explosives made from cleaning supplies at another. "They have abandoned their defensive position," Velton observed. "No," Zektar said slowly. "They are not defending. They are hunting." The Korthak ground commander was clearly becoming frustrated. His troops were designed to fight enemies who followed predictable patterns, but the humans seemed to have no patterns at all. They appeared and disappeared like ghosts, striking from unexpected directions with weapons that should not have existed. As Zektar watched the battle continue, he realized that everything he thought he knew about warfare was being challenged by these strange creatures from Earth. They fought without honor, used improvised weapons, and seemed to enjoy the chaos of combat, but somehow, impossibly, they were winning. What happened next made Zektar question everything he knew about military combat. The human ship, which should have been destroyed by now, was somehow getting stronger as the battle continued. Captain Morrison's voice came through the communications, with background sounds of sparks and alarms. "Pete, I need more power to the forward guns. Can you give me anything?" "I'm pulling power from everything that's not keeping us alive, Captain. The coffee maker, the food processors, even the toilet systems. We're basically flying on fumes and hope right now." "Perfect. That's exactly how we like it." Zektar could not understand this attitude. Most military commanders would be terrified if their ship was failing. But the humans seemed to become more dangerous as their situation got worse. The human ship suddenly accelerated toward the depot itself. For a moment, Zektar thought they were retreating or trying to land for repairs. Instead, Captain Morrison did something that no sane pilot would ever attempt. He flew his damaged ship directly through the depot's loading area, using the building's own structure as cover while firing at the Korthak vessels from an impossible angle. "He is using the depot as a shield," Velton observed in amazement. But Morrison was not finished. As his ship emerged from the other side of the building, it was carrying something attached to its hull. Zektar enhanced the camera view and saw that the humans had somehow grabbed one of the depot's massive industrial cranes during their flight through the structure. "They have turned their ship into a construction vehicle," Zektar said, hardly believing his own words. The human ship swung the crane like a giant club, smashing it into the side of a Korthak cruiser. The enemy vessel, designed to withstand energy weapons and explosives, was not built to handle being hit by a massive piece of mining equipment traveling at high speed. The Korthak ship's hull cracked open, and atmosphere began venting into space. On the ground, the battle had turned into something that resembled a nightmare for the Korthak forces. What should have been a simple assault on a lightly defended depot had become a deadly maze where nothing worked the way it was supposed to. Lieutenant Colonel Rodriguez had divided her forces into small teams that moved through the building like they owned it. Every room had become a trap, every corridor a potential ambush. The Korthak soldiers, trained for direct combat, found themselves fighting an enemy that refused to be found. Sergeant Lisa Park had discovered that the depot's industrial washing machines could be turned into weapons. By overloading them with cleaning chemicals and setting them to explode at the right moment, she created bombs that filled entire sections of the building with toxic foam. The Korthak warriors, with their heavy armor and breathing equipment, were slowed down by the foam while the lighter human soldiers moved through it easily, using improvised breathing masks made from maintenance filters. "They have turned cleaning equipment into chemical weapons," Zektar observed, his voice filled with disbelief. Corporal Dan Wright had found an even more creative solution. The depot's plumbing system was connected to the main heating plant, which meant he could control the temperature and pressure throughout the building. When a group of Korthak tried to breach the main storage area, Wright flooded the room with scalding water from the fire suppression system. But it was Staff Sergeant Ricci who provided the most shocking moment of the entire battle. Instead of continuing to defend the depot, he had taken his team outside and was now attacking the Korthak command ship directly. Zektar watched in amazement as the human soldiers, wearing nothing but basic spacesuits, used maintenance tools to cut their way into the hull of an enemy warship. They moved across the ship's surface like insects, too small and fast for the vessel's weapons to target effectively. "What are they doing?" Velton asked. "I believe they are attempting to board the enemy command vessel," Zektar replied. "That is impossible. They have no heavy weapons, no proper equipment for ship-to-ship assault." But the humans were proving that impossible was just another word for difficult. Ricci's team had found the ship's external maintenance hatches and were cutting through them with welding torches stolen from the depot. Once inside, they began moving through the Korthak vessel like they were exploring a new building. The Korthak crew was completely unprepared for this type of attack. Their ship was designed to fight other ships, not to repel boarders who had climbed onto the hull from outside. The internal security systems were meant to handle sabotage or mutiny, not enemy soldiers who were systematically dismantling the ship from within. Ricci's voice came through the communication system as his team worked their way toward the ship's power core. "Captain Morrison, we're inside their command ship. This thing is built like a tank, but they've got some serious weak points if you know where to look." "What kind of weak points?" Morrison asked while his own ship continued to fight 3 Korthak vessels at once. "Well, their power distribution system runs right through the crew quarters, and they've got these really nice computer cores that don't like it when you pour coffee on them." Zektar realized that Ricci was describing acts of sabotage that would never occur to a properly trained military force. The humans were not trying to capture the ship or hold territory. They were simply breaking everything they could find in the most efficient way possible. Meanwhile, back in the depot, Private Nancy Bell had made a discovery that changed the entire battle. The facility's main power core was not just designed to provide electricity. It was also connected to a network of mining charges that were used to break up asteroids for processing. Instead of using these charges for their intended purpose, Bell had figured out how to turn them into the largest, improvised explosive device that Zektar had ever seen. "She is going to destroy the entire depot," Velton said when he realized what the human soldier was planning. But Zektar was beginning to understand how these humans thought. "No, she is going to use it as a weapon." Bell had calculated the exact moment when the largest group of Korthak forces would be inside the depot's main structure. Instead of detonating the charges to destroy the building, she set them to create a controlled explosion that would disable the enemy troops without completely destroying the facility. The blast sent shockwaves through the building that knocked the Korthak soldiers off their feet, while the humans who had prepared for the explosion used the confusion to launch a final assault. In space, Captain Morrison's ship had somehow managed to destroy 2 Korthak cruisers using nothing but improvised weapons and impossible flying techniques. Engineer Pete Collins had kept the vessel running with repairs that violated every safety regulation in the galactic manual. "Captain, I've got one more idea, but it's really stupid," Collins said over the communication system. "How stupid?" Morrison asked. "Remember that electromagnetic pulse device I was working on as a hobby project? The one made from spare parts that you told me would never work? The thing you built in your spare time using broken equipment? That's the one. I think I can overload it and create a pulse big enough to disable their flagship." Morrison was quiet for a moment. "Will it work?" "Probably not. It might also destroy our own ship." "Sounds perfect. Do it." Zektar could not believe what he was hearing. These humans were about to risk their entire ship on a weapon that their own engineer admitted probably would not work. Collins activated his improvised device, and every screen on Zektar's bridge lit up with electromagnetic interference. The pulse spread out from the human ship like a wave, washing over the remaining Korthak vessels. The enemy flagship, which had been preparing to finish off the human ship, suddenly went dark. All of its systems failed at once, leaving it drifting helplessly in space. At the same time, Ricci's team completed their sabotage of the Korthak command ship. The vessel's power core overloaded, and the ship began breaking apart from the inside. The remaining Korthak forces, seeing their command structure collapse and their most powerful ships disabled, made a decision that shocked everyone involved. In the battle, they surrendered. The Korthak commander sent a message to the human ship requesting terms for withdrawal. But his words revealed something that made Zektar realize just how completely the humans had changed the nature of this battle. "Human vessel, we do not understand what we are fighting. Our forces cannot adapt to your methods. We request permission to withdraw from this sector." The Korthak were not surrendering because they were defeated. They were surrendering because they could not comprehend what they were fighting against. Captain Morrison's response was typically human. "Permission, granted, but next time maybe try knocking first instead of just barging in and shooting up the place." As the Korthak fleet limped away from the battle zone, Zektar sat in his command chair, staring at the tactical display in complete silence. His fleet had not fired a single shot in the last hour of combat. The humans had won the entire battle, by themselves, using methods that no military academy in the galaxy taught. Velton finally broke the silence. "Commander, what do we put in our report?" Zektar looked at the damaged human ship, which was somehow still flying despite having no business being operational. He watched the depot, which was still standing despite being turned into a weapon. 3 hours after the battle ended, Zektar stood in the damaged depot looking at the aftermath of human warfare. The building was still standing, but it barely looked like the same place. Every room showed signs of the strange battle that had taken place there. Scorch marks covered the walls where humans had used welding torches as weapons. The ventilation system had been completely rewired to deliver steam attacks. The cafeteria looked like a bomb had gone off because Private Nancy Bell had turned the kitchen equipment into explosives. But the most amazing thing was that the depot was still functional. Despite turning the entire building into a weapon, the 8 humans had somehow managed to keep the important systems working. Captain Morrison walked up to Zektar, his uniform torn and dirty, but his expression calm. "Commander, my crew is ready to give you a full briefing on our tactics if you're interested." Zektar had many questions, but he did not know where to start. "Captain, I have been a military officer for 30 years. I have studied every major battle in galactic history. What I saw today does not match anything I have learned about warfare." Morrison nodded. "I figured you might be confused. Most alien species are when they first see how humans fight. Would you like me to explain?" "Please." Morrison gestured around the damaged depot. "The first thing you need to understand is that humans have been fighting wars for thousands of years before we ever left our planet. Not just one big war or two, but constant fighting between different groups, nations, and tribes." "This seems inefficient," Zektar observed. "Maybe, but it taught us something important. We learned that there's no such thing as a fair fight. In war, you use every advantage you can get, and you never stop looking for new ones." Lieutenant Colonel Rodriguez joined them, still carrying a welding torch that she had been using as a weapon. "Commander, can I ask you something? How do Valonian forces usually train for combat?" "We study approved tactics, practice standard formations, and learn to follow orders precisely," Zektar replied. Rodriguez nodded. "That makes sense for a species that has peace most of the time. But humans have never had peace. We've been fighting each other since before we had metal weapons. Every generation has had to figure out new ways to win battles because the old ways stopped working." Staff Sergeant Ricci approached them, still wearing his damaged spacesuit from the boarding action. "Commander, what would you do if your enemy was using tactics you had never seen before?" Zektar thought about this. "I would consult the military manuals to find the appropriate response. And if the manuals didn't have an answer, I would contact my superiors for guidance." Ricci smiled. "That's the difference right there. Humans don't have time to check manuals or call for help in the middle of a fight. We just figure it out as we go." Over the next hour, the humans explained their methods to Zektar. Each explanation made him more confused about everything he thought he knew about military science. Captain Morrison told him about human naval warfare, where ships had to adapt constantly to new weapons and technologies. On Earth, as soon as someone invented a new type of armor, someone else invented a new weapon to get through it. We learned that the only way to survive was to keep changing our tactics faster than the enemy could adapt to them. Engineer Pete Collins explained how he had kept their ship running during the battle. "Commander, most species build their ships to work perfectly when everything goes right. Humans build ships to keep working when everything goes wrong. We assume that half our equipment will break during a fight, so we design everything to be fixable with whatever we can find." "But how do you train for this?" Zektar asked. "We don't exactly," Collins replied. "We just learn to be creative. Every human engineer knows how to jury-rig solutions using random parts. It's not something you can teach from a book. You learn it by fixing things that are broken." Sergeant Lisa Park showed Zektar how she had turned cleaning supplies into weapons. "Commander, on Earth we have a saying, necessity is the mother of invention. When you really need something to work, you'll find a way to make it work. Even if it is dangerous? Especially if it's dangerous. The more desperate the situation, the more creative we get." Private Nancy Bell explained her use of the depot's power systems as weapons. "Commander, humans are taught from childhood that everything can be used for something other than its intended purpose. A tool is just a tool until you need it to be a weapon. Then it becomes a weapon." "This seems chaotic," Zektar observed. "It is chaotic," Bell agreed. "But chaos is sometimes better than order. When your enemy expects you to be organized and predictable, being chaotic gives you an advantage." The more Zektar learned about human warfare, the more he realized that what he had witnessed was not just different tactics, it was a completely different way of thinking about conflict itself. Corporal Dan Wright explained how he had used the building systems against the enemy. "Commander, most species see a building as shelter. Humans see a building as a collection of tools that might be useful for something. Every pipe, every wire, every piece of equipment is a potential weapon if you know how to use it. But this requires extensive knowledge of engineering and construction, Zektar pointed out. Not really, Wright replied. It just requires curiosity. Humans are naturally curious about how things work. Most of us learn basic engineering just by taking things apart and putting them back together as children. Ricci described the boarding action against the Korthak command ship. Commander, most military forces are trained to fight specific types of battles in specific ways. But humans learn to adapt to any situation. We don't have a manual for boarding an enemy ship with maintenance tools because we know that every situation is different. How do you coordinate such complex operations without detailed planning? We trust each other, Ricci said simply. Every human soldier is trained to think for themselves and make decisions. We don't need someone to tell us what to do in every situation because we're taught to figure it out ourselves. This was perhaps the most shocking revelation for Zektar. In Valonian military culture, soldiers followed orders exactly as given. The idea of individual soldiers making tactical decisions during battle was almost unthinkable. But what if they make wrong decisions? Zektar asked. Sometimes they do, Morrison admitted. But wrong decisions made quickly are often better than right decisions made too late. And humans are pretty good at fixing mistakes as we go. As the day continued, Zektar began to understand that human military effectiveness was not based on superior technology or overwhelming numbers. It was based on a fundamental difference in how humans approached problems. Rodriguez summed it up best. Commander, most species develop military doctrine and then train their soldiers to follow it. Humans develop soldiers who can create doctrine in real time based on whatever situation they find themselves in. This means every human soldier is essentially a military strategist, Zektar realized. Exactly. We don't just train people to fight. We train them to think. That evening, Zektar sat alone in his quarters reviewing the battle reports and trying to make sense of what he had learned. The humans had achieved a complete victory against overwhelming odds using methods that violated every principle of civilized warfare. But the more he thought about it, the more he realized that the humans were not uncivilized. They were something much more dangerous. They were unpredictable. The Valonian Empire had conquered half the galaxy using military doctrine that was thousands of years old. Their methods worked because most species fought in similar ways, following similar principles, and making similar mistakes. But humans had never learned these principles. They had developed their own approach to warfare based on constant conflict and adaptation. They fought like no other species in the galaxy because they had learned to fight in ways that no other species could imagine. Zektar opened his personal communication system and began to compose a message to his superiors. But as he started to write, he realized that he had no idea how to explain what he had witnessed. How could he tell the High Command that everything they knew about warfare was incomplete? How could he explain that a species they considered primitive had military capabilities that surpassed their own? How could he describe tactics that had no names and strategies that were invented during battle? More importantly, how could he continue to serve in a military that suddenly seemed limited and predictable compared to what he had seen? Zektar deleted the message and stared out the window at the stars. For the first time in his career, he began to question not just his orders, but the entire system he had devoted his life to serving. The humans had not just won a battle. They had shown him a completely different way of thinking about conflict, strategy, and military service itself, and Zektar realized that once you had seen what warfare could really be, it was impossible to go back to what it used to be. 2 weeks after the battle at the depot, Zektar sat in his private office staring at a document that would change his life forever. It was his resignation letter from the Valonian military, written and rewritten dozens of times but never sent. The official report of the battle had been filed and accepted by High Command. They were pleased with the successful defense of the mining station and impressed by the complete defeat of the Korthak raiders. But they seemed to miss the most important part of what had happened. The humans had not just won a battle. They had demonstrated a form of warfare that made every other military force in the galaxy look primitive by comparison. Zektar's door chimed, and Captain Velton entered. "Commander, I have the new assignment orders from High Command. We are being transferred to the Outer Rim to patrol against pirate activity." "Thank you, Captain," Zektar replied, not looking up from his desk. Velton hesitated. "Sir, if I may ask, you have seemed troubled since the battle with the humans. Is there something wrong?" Zektar finally looked up at his old friend. "Velton, in your opinion, what is the purpose of military service?" "To protect the Empire and maintain order throughout civilized space," Velton replied immediately. "And how do we accomplish this?" "Through discipline, proper training, and adherence to established military doctrine." Zektar nodded slowly. "That is what I have believed for 30 years. But what if our doctrine is wrong? What if everything we have learned about warfare is incomplete?" Velton looked confused. "Sir, our military methods have been successful for centuries. We have conquered dozens of worlds and maintained peace throughout the galaxy." "Yes, but we have only fought enemies who think like us. What happens when we face an enemy that does not follow our rules?" "You mean like the humans?" "Exactly like the humans." Velton sat down across from Zektar. "Commander, the humans are allies now. They are not our enemies." "That is not my point," Zektar said. "My point is that in one afternoon, these humans showed me that there are ways of thinking about warfare that I never imagined. They won a battle using methods that should not have worked, against an enemy that should have defeated them easily." "So what are you saying?" Zektar picked up his resignation letter. "I am saying that I need to learn how they do it." That night, Zektar sent 2 messages. The first was his resignation from the Valonian military, citing personal reasons and a desire to pursue independent study. The second was a request to the human embassy for information about visiting Earth. The response to his resignation came quickly. High Command accepted it without question, assuming that he wanted to retire after a long and successful career. They had no idea that he was planning to study with the species they considered primitive allies. The response from the humans took longer, but it was more encouraging. The message came from someone called General Paul Martinez at Earth's Interspecies Military Exchange Program. "Commander Zektar, we have reviewed your request to visit Earth for educational purposes. Your service record is impressive, and we would be honored to discuss your interest in human military doctrine. Please contact us when you are ready to travel to Earth." 3 months later, Zektar's small personal ship approached Earth's orbital defense grid. The planet looked different from what he had expected. Instead of the orderly planned cities that most advanced civilizations built, Earth showed signs of organic growth and constant change. The orbital stations around Earth were a mixture of different designs and technologies clearly built over many years by people who had learned to work with whatever they had available. It reminded Zektar of the human ship he had seen at the depot battle. "Unknown vessel. This is Earth Defense. Control. Please state your identity and purpose. This is former Commander Zektar of the Valonian Empire, requesting permission to land for a meeting with General Martinez. Welcome to Earth, Commander. You are cleared to land at Washington Spaceport. General Martinez will meet you there." As Zektar's ship descended through Earth's atmosphere, he could see the planet's surface covered with cities that seemed to grow like living things. Roads twisted and curved around natural obstacles instead of cutting straight lines through them. Buildings were different shapes and sizes, built to fit their environment rather than following a standard design. It was chaotic and disorganized, but somehow it worked. At the spaceport, General Martinez was waiting with a woman in a military uniform. They both looked older than the soldiers Zektar had met during the battle, with gray hair and faces that showed experience. "Commander Zektar," General Martinez said, extending his hand in the human greeting ritual. "I'm General Paul Martinez, and this is Colonel Susan Hayes, director of our military exchange program." Zektar shook their hands awkwardly with one of his forearms. "General Colonel, thank you for agreeing to meet with me." "Please call me Paul," the general said. "We're very interested in hearing why a decorated Valonian commander wants to study human military methods. They walked through the spaceport, which was busy with ships from dozens of different worlds. Zektar noticed that the human personnel moved differently from other military forces he had observed. They seemed more relaxed, more willing to adapt to unexpected situations. General Martinez. Paul, Zektar said. I observed human forces during the battle at Mining Station Delta 7. What I saw there has changed my understanding of warfare completely. Colonel Hayes nodded. We read the reports from Captain Morrison and his team. They said you seemed very interested in their tactics. More than interested, Zektar replied. I was shocked. In 47 years of military service, I have never seen anything like what your people accomplished that day. They entered a meeting room in the military complex, and Zektar began to explain his situation. He described the battle in detail, emphasizing not just what the humans had done, but how their methods challenged everything he had learned about military science. Your people do not just fight wars, he said. You turn warfare itself into an art form. Every human soldier thinks like a strategist. Every piece of equipment becomes a potential weapon. Every setback becomes an opportunity for innovation. General, Martinez leaned back in his chair. Commander, what you're describing sounds normal to us. We've been fighting this way for so long that we don't really think about it as special. That is exactly my point, Zektar said. What you consider normal behavior would be considered impossible by most other species. Your soldiers make tactical decisions that trained strategists would not think of. They use equipment in ways that engineers never intended. They win battles that should be unwinnable. Colonel Hayes looked thoughtful. So you want to understand how we do it? I want to learn to think the way humans think about warfare, Zektar said. I resigned my commission and traveled across the galaxy because I realized that in all my years of military service, I had never truly understood what warfare could be. General Martinez and Colonel Hayes exchanged a look. That's a big request, Commander. Learning to think like a human soldier isn't something we can teach in a few weeks. I am prepared to stay as long as necessary, Zektar replied. I have no other commitments now. What exactly do you want to do here? Colonel Hayes asked. I want to enroll in your military academies. I want to study your history. I want to understand how a species develops the kind of tactical flexibility I witnessed. I want to learn from the masters of adaptive warfare. General Martinez smiled. Well, Commander, I have to say this is the most unusual request we've ever received, but if you're serious about this, we can arrange for you to audit courses at the Marine Corps War College. You'd be the first alien student we've ever had. I am completely serious, Zektar said. 2 weeks later, Zektar found himself sitting in a classroom full of human military officers, listening to a lecture about something called improvised tactical solutions. The instructor, a tough-looking woman named Major Linda Cooper, was explaining how to turn everyday objects into tactical advantages. Remember, Major Cooper said, the enemy expects you to use your equipment in standard ways. When you use a communication device as an explosive, or turn a food processor into a signal jammer, you gain the advantage of surprise. Zektar raised one of his 4 hands. Major, how do you train soldiers to think this creatively? Major Cooper smiled. We don't train them to be creative, Commander. We just teach them that there are no rules except winning. Creativity comes naturally when you stop limiting yourself to what things are supposed to do. In another class, Zektar learned about human military history. The instructor, Colonel Robert Blake, explained how centuries of constant warfare had shaped human tactical thinking. Every war taught us something new, Colonel Blake said. Every defeat forced us to find better ways to fight. We didn't develop our methods by studying theory. We developed them by surviving battles that should have killed us. After class, Zektar approached the colonel. Sir, is it true that humans actually enjoy fighting impossible battles? Colonel Blake laughed. Not exactly enjoy, Commander, but we do our best work when everything seems hopeless. There's something about impossible odds that brings out the best in human military thinking. As weeks turned into months, Zektar began to understand what made human warfare so effective. It was not just their tactics or their adaptability.